We're catching up with Rowan Ramsey MP. Rowan, we spoke recently on Flow with the Social Services Minister Aranda Rishworth. She in effect said the Coalition hadn't produced any evidence this cashless debit card had any positive benefits for the community in Ceduna. You've consulted with colleagues who've been over to Ceduna recently.
Last week our Shadow Attorney General and Indigenous Affairs Minister Julian Lisa went to Ceduna. I was meant to be with him, but unfortunately I got struck here with COVID a couple of days before, so I've only really just got myself out of COVID release at the moment, so I'm still a bit husky. Sorry about that, the listeners, but I'm going fine. The feedback I'm getting on the ground in Ceduna and through Julian is that there's an enormous amount of trepidation about the shutdown of the card. Now, Amanda will say that we're not shutting it down, we're turning it into a voluntary card, which pretty much means that anyone who should be on it will not be, and anyone who maybe doesn't need to be on it, they will be the ones that are likely to stay. So I think you could say it's the end of the card, and what its ramifications will mean in other places where the card operate, including Kalgoorlie, the East Kimberley and Bundaberg, will all remain to be seen. But for Amanda's comments there that we haven't produced the evidence, I don't agree with her. There was an Auditor General's report quite recently into the card, and Labor have been using this as saying, oh well, look, there's no net benefits from it. But in fact, what the auditor basically said was that it hasn't been able to be properly monitored, properly evaluated. Put numbers on the improvement, I suppose, is the issue, and it's because it's so difficult to do so. I mean, how do you know? How do you know if children are coming to school better fed? How do you know if there's less violence within the household? These things are not the type of things that get reported on a daily basis. A lot of this stuff goes on and isn't reported. And yet, when I have individuals in the community come up to me, and I often tell the story of I say elderly, but she's probably a middle-aged woman who grasped me on the arm, and she said, I didn't want this card, but now we got it. Don't you let them take it away. And there's a story in that, and it's about this violence that goes on within communities, that goes with humbug and extortion of benefits. And so I think the community itself are quite concerned about where we're going to go now. I know that the Indigenous Far West Leaders Indigenous group have run out of patience or heart to keep fighting this fight. They felt like they've had to defend their position for the last 5 years as people kept attacking them. And they've taken this up to their community and championed it in their community. They've just worn out, and now they've got a government that's going to get rid of it. So they're going, oh, well, it's going. What are you going to do? And I think that's the big question now, is what is going to happen. I'm very pleased Amanda went out there, and I asked her to do so. Maybe she was going before, but she did go out to Ceduna and sat there with people. But my disappointment was that she went there with a pre-ordained position, not that, well, let's go out there and see whether the card is worth keeping. She went out there with the idea, well, we're shutting down the card, what are we going to do now? And, of course, the consequence of that is whatever happens from now on, or from December the 30th, she and her government will own the results.
Well, my question, maybe the listeners got the same question, is it simplistic to think that you would simply consult with the people who've been on the card in terms of reaching out to them through Social Security and saying, well, what is your impression been of being on the card? Why is it difficult to quantify, I guess, their perceptions? Why do we not get more stories like the one you shared there about the lady saying she's glad she ended up on the card?
Well, because people are sick of defending it and not keen to put their head up in public and say, I like this card and I want to keep the card.
But if it was on a condition of anonymity or something, this sort of consultation, why couldn't they get that data?
Well, that's maybe true, but of course it's generally speaking not people who are happy with the situation that come forward, it's people who are unhappy with the situation. And I think Linda Burney, who is the minister in this case now, the Indigenous Affairs Minister, she's been to Ceduna 3 times, and in that time made quite clear that she wasn't interested in meeting with any of those groups who supported the card, including the Far West Indigenous Leaders Group, and then came away saying, well, nobody wants the card. Well, if you just keep talking into the mirror, you'll keep getting the same result. The mirror will say exactly what you want it to say, the same as what you're saying.
So isn't there a risk there that you end up with the community that becomes sort of an ideological pawn between two sides of government? How do we end up getting something that's actually what the community wants?
Well, I strongly believe that we do have what the community wants. Only a recent trip to Ceduna, I walked into one of the schools. There's two up there, and we're talking to a group of workers. They were really horrified the fact that they're going to stop the card. They are struggling to understand why anyone would do that. We've had a couple of experiences over the 5 years. I'll say 5 years it's been in place, where there's been an influx of cash come to the recipients outside of the cashless debit card, so back in their main account, and the whole thing's gone to hell in a handbag. We've had a resumption of antisocial behaviour, people camped in town, not going home, off their medication, kids away from school, all those types of things. And it just seems to all of us that that's what we're likely to see on a more regular basis, the sort of tourists avoiding boarding the place. We tried in government, Rishi, to actually make this permanent, this card, for the existing sites. And the last time we put it up, we've had to do 12-month extensions. The last time we put it up was become permanent. And in the end, Labor Party wouldn't support us, the Greens wouldn't support us, and then Rex Patrick wouldn't support us, and Jackie Lambie wouldn't support us. And so we got a 2-year extension. Well, the 2-year extension expires on December 31. And so for those people that are losing the card, well, they can think back about those senators, some still there, some not, that actually voted against this opportunity to cement it in place and leave a permanent improvement in a place like Ceduna.
Now, something Minister Rishworth also talked about was, and this seems to have been a line of attack that seemed to work against the card, was this one about a private contractor, Indu, being the one who were engaged to provide the card. Was it a mistake to not just run that through government?
I'm not sure. I'm not one of those people that believe that governments are the whirlpool of all expertise in any given area. I think Indu have done a fair job. Whether or not that's something that could be progressed in the future, it hasn't been my party's policy, but it's certainly, anyone who has heard me speak about this, I believe this card should be running all over Australia, and it shouldn't have this sort of Indigenous tint on it. The fact that those first three sites had higher levels of Indigenous communities than average, that's why the Bundaberg site was so important. Where in fact I think indigeneity there is 4% or thereabouts, so not very far from the national average. I think for people who struggle to manage their life on a working age welfare payment, wherever they come from or whoever they are in Australia, their card is a good solution, because they are not the only ones who suffer if they are not managing it correctly.
And to be clear, you're talking about this, that welfare sort of, I guess, the unemployment benefit or whatever the equivalent is for Indigenous people. You were never talking about that going to the age pension or becoming compulsory for age pensioners?
The Labor Party have often thrown, and in the lead up to the election, the Liberals are going to make all age pensioners go on the cashless debit card. Well, of course, that was never the case. The fact is there are age pensioners on the cashless debit card, but the only way they could get there was to request it. Mm. So I think that answers the question quite succinctly. They're on it because they want to be on it. Whether or not that continues when the card becomes totally voluntary, it remains to be seen, because my guess is that so many people will bail off of it because they can, and eventually they say, that's it, no, we're not having that anymore, and it'll be gone. How on earth are they going to manage the Northern Territory, which has actually been on a card, I think, since 2008, 2009, something like that. That was part of the intervention.
Oh, and that's still going?
Well, yes and no. It has quite recently actually been shut down and they've been transferred over to the cashless debit card because it's a much better technological platform and usable in a lot more places now. If the card eventually collapses because it's become this voluntary type of organisation, well, just pick up the paper and have a look what's happening around Alice Springs at the moment. You get some idea where we might be heading.
All right, well, we've got plenty to track, not only in Ceduna but around Australia with this one. Rowan Ramsey, member for Grey, thanks for joining us on that one today.
No worries, Ricky. Sorry about the husky voice, but if you need a blues singer, I'm available on the weekend.
And just a postscript to that interview, in all seriousness, when it comes to family and domestic violence, there is support available. It was mentioned during that interview. There's 24/7 service, 1-800-RESPECT on the telephone, 1-800-737-732, or you can make contact or access resources at 1800respect.org.au online.